It was late evening in a small town in the desert. The sun had already disappeared behind the faraway hills, leaving the sky soft and purple. The houses were quiet. Most people had already finished dinner, and children were getting ready for bed. But at the edge of the neighborhood, in a small wooden house with a broken fence, 8-year-old Lena sat on the front porch with her knees pulled up to her chest. Lena could not hear the wind or the distant dogs. She had been unable to hear since birth. She often watched the world by looking carefully at faces, hands, and the shapes of people's mouths when they spoke. The world felt like a silent movie. She didn't mind the quiet, but she did mind feeling alone in it. Tonight felt strange, even for her. Her father, Roy, had been in a restless mood all day. His movements were fast one moment and slow the next. His words were unclear, and his steps were unsteady. When he was in this state, the world felt even smaller to Lena. She didn't understand everything happening around her, but she could always sense when something was not right. The front porch light flickered as if it couldn't decide whether to stay on or off. Lena tucked herself behind the side post of the porch, where she liked to hide when she felt unsure. She watched the street. A few neighbors stood in small groups, whispering to one another while glancing toward her house. Their expressions told her something serious was happening. She tried to read their lips, but they spoke too fast and too quietly for her to understand. Inside the house, she could see her father pacing. He looked upset, waving his arms, saying things she couldn't fully follow. She wished she could understand him better. She wished he could understand her. She wished both of them could meet somewhere in the middle. A car stopped in front of the house. The headlights washed over the porch, making Lena blink. A woman stepped out. She wore a neat blouse and carried a folder. Lena recognized her from before. She was a social worker who sometimes visited houses in the area. She wasn't unkind, but Lena always felt nervous when she saw her because her visits usually meant grown-ups were worried. The woman walked up the path with calm steps. She knocked gently. Roy opened the door. He looked both surprised and irritated. The woman spoke to him, her hands making small, careful gestures. Lena watched their lips. She could tell the woman was asking questions. Probably about Lena. Probably about the noise neighbors had reported. Roy talked louder and faster. His mouth moved sharply, and Lena knew he was upset. She saw the woman's eyebrows pull together in concern. Sometimes she tried to help, but her kindness only made her father more frustrated. The neighbors gathered a little closer now. Some of them knew Lena couldn't hear. Some felt sorry for her. Others simply didn't know what to do. They whispered again, their eyes shifting between the social worker, Roy, and the small girl hiding on the porch. Then Roy came outside, still speaking loudly. He reached for Lena's arm, not roughly, but in a hurried, confused way. He brought her to the woman, as if trying to solve something quickly. Lena's small hands held onto her shirt. She didn't know what was happening, but the tension in the air made her stomach feel tight. Roy said something long and emotional, but Lena couldn't understand the words. She only caught the shapes of a few. She can't hear. His mouth moved with frustration, his eyes tired. Lena felt her cheeks warm. She hated being talked about like she was a problem. She wasn't angry, just deeply sad. She wanted to tell him she understood more than he thought. She wanted to explain that she could read lips and expressions and feelings. She wanted to say she loved stories and drawing pictures in the sand. But she didn't know how to express any of it clearly. The social worker bent down to Lena, speaking softly. Her mouth moved gently, but Lena was too overwhelmed to follow. She stared at the woman's kind face, but couldn't focus on the shapes of her words. Then, another shadow appeared, near the gate, tall, wide, calm. His presence alone made the small groups of neighbors turn. A man slowly approached, taking careful steps so as not to alarm anyone. He was known in town but rarely seen outside the shelter where he volunteered. His name was Ben, though many people called him Bear because he was so large. He was Apache, with long dark hair tied back and a steady gaze that never rushed. Ben stood quietly at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He simply observed. When he finally moved, it was gentle. A quiet climb up the wooden steps. Even though he was tall and broad, he somehow made almost no sound. Lena noticed him immediately. She didn't feel afraid. His expression was calm, and his movements were warm, like someone approaching a timid animal with respect. The social worker stepped aside, letting him pass. Roy looked startled to see him, but didn't object. Ben slowly knelt down in front of Lena. Instead of reaching for her, or speaking too fast, like others often did, he paused. He let her look at him. He let her feel the moment. His eyes were kind, not pitying, just aware, steady. He spoke. But unlike everyone else that night, his words were slow, shaped clearly, spoken softly enough that the calmness entered his whole posture. Lena watched his lips. She understood. "I know you can," he whispered. He didn't say she could hear sounds. He meant something else. Something deeper. Something that reached her in a way nothing else had that night. Someone finally saw her, not as broken or incomplete, but as someone who understood the world in her own way. Lena's chest filled with warmth, her heart felt lighter. She blinked several times, unsure why her eyes suddenly stung. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her gently, directly, with belief instead of frustration. Behind them, the social worker watched the interaction with a surprised expression. She could see Lena responding in a way she hadn't before. Roy, too, was silent now, his earlier noise fading as he watched his daughter look up at this quiet, towering man. Ben didn't push her. He didn't ask her to move or answer questions. He simply let her exist in the moment, giving her space to breathe. For the first time that day, Lena felt safe enough to unclench her small hands. She nodded just once, small and timid. But that nod meant more than words could express. It meant she understood. It meant she trusted him. Ben smiled softly, a smile that reached his eyes. He extended his hand but did not touch her. He waited. Lena took a moment. Then she placed her hand in his, not because she was being forced, but because she wanted to. The neighbors slowly relaxed. The social worker's shoulders eased. The air around them felt gentler. Lena didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know where she would go, or what decisions the adults would make, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was not alone. Someone believed in her. And for the first time in her 8 quiet years, she felt the world open a little wider. She felt seen. She felt heard in a different way, but in a way that mattered just as deeply. She walked beside Ben down the steps, holding his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his warm, steady one. The night air brushed her face. The purple sky above seemed softer now, as if welcoming her into a new beginning. Whatever came next, she wasn't afraid. Ben walked slowly beside Lena as they moved away from the small wooden house. The soft desert night surrounded them, peaceful, but full of quiet questions. Lena held his hand gently, her fingers warm and small in his steady grip. She did not know him well, but she felt strangely calm near him, as if his presence created a safe space where she did not have to worry about misunderstandings or loud emotions. The social worker followed at a short distance, giving them space. The neighbors watched from their porches, whispering softly, but Lena did not pay attention to any of them. Her eyes stayed on Ben's slow, careful steps and the gentle movement of his long hair in the evening breeze. When they reached the car parked near the fence, Ben stopped. He knelt down again so his face matched her height. He moved slowly, letting her see every bit of his expression so she could read his lips clearly. "You are not in trouble," he whispered, forming each word with gentle care. Lena watched the shape of his mouth. She understood the sentence with surprising ease. His way of speaking seemed made for her. People normally talked too fast or too sharply, making her feel lost. But Ben spoke like someone who knew silence well, someone who respected it. Lena nodded softly. She wasn't in trouble. She was simply going somewhere new. Ben continued. You will come with us for now, just until things become clearer, all right? His eyes were warm and patient. He didn't push her to answer quickly, and that simple patience made Lena feel lighter inside. She nodded again, a little more confidently this time. The social worker opened the car door. Before Lena climbed in, Ben gently touched the side of the seat to show her where she should sit. He did not guide her by the arm or hurry her. He simply showed her, giving her the choice. That small kindness mattered more to her than he could have known. Inside the car, everything felt different. The world outside was quiet, and the headlights painted soft shapes on the sandy road as they drove. Lena looked out the window, watching the familiar houses disappear one by one. Ben sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. His large hands rested calmly in his lap. Lena kept glancing at him, curious. There was something unusual about him. Most grown-ups made big movements, big sounds, or big emotions. But Ben was big, and still at the same time. He felt like a mountain strong, but never overwhelming. She studied his face. He did not stare at her or look away too quickly. He didn't smile too much or try to make her talk. He simply existed in a comfortable silence. That silence made it easier for her to breathe. After a while, Ben spoke again, in the same soft whisper. You watch people well. Lena blinked, surprised he noticed something she had never told anyone. You see things others miss, he continued. I can tell. Lena turned her head slightly, letting her hair fall over her shoulder. She felt a tiny spark of pride she rarely felt. No one had ever pointed out her strengths before. Most people only talked about what she couldn't do. Ben raised one hand slowly, making a simple gesture in the air. It wasn't sign language. Not exactly. It was something older, smoother. Lena watched carefully as he drew a shape with his fingers, 3 small curves in the air, almost like waves. This means calm, he explained, shaping the word clearly. Lena understood instantly. It was a comforting gesture, like a message written in the air. He continued, making a different curved motion. This means trust. Another shape. This means safe. Lena's eyes widened. She had never seen these signs before, but she felt the meaning in them. They were gentle, expressive, almost like drawings. She repeated the gesture for safe, her hand moving slowly. Uncertain, but eager. Ben nodded with approval. Good. You learn fast. Lena warmed at the compliment. She repeated the second sign, trust, a little more confidently. Then she practiced calm. Her small fingers moved through the air like she was learning a new language. One, made of movement instead of sound. The car drove deeper into the quieter parts of town, toward a cluster of small buildings near the edge of the reservation. These buildings were part of the shelter where Ben spent most of his time helping children and families who needed support. When they arrived, the night had grown softer. The sky was full of stars. The desert air was cool and clean. Lena took it all in silently. She had never been here before, but it didn't feel frightening. Something about the place was peaceful. Ben stepped out first and offered his hand again, not forcing, not pulling, but simply offering. Lena took it. As they walked inside, a warm scent greeted them. A mix of cedar, warm blankets, and soft desert air. A quiet hallway led to a cozy common room. A few children sat on the floor drawing, while an older woman sorted blankets in a basket. She looked up and smiled kindly at Lena, not with surprise or confusion, but with gentle welcome. Lena stood close to Ben, feeling a little shy. New places always made her nervous. Ben knelt one more time so she could see his face clearly. His whisper carried the same calm strength as before. "You are safe here." Lena believed him. He guided her to a soft chair and sat beside her on the floor so their faces stayed level. He didn't rush to ask questions or explain too much. He simply spoke slowly, with simple words shaped clearly so she could follow. "I want to help you, not change you," he said. Lena watched the sentence form on his lips. It touched her deeply. Most people treated her silence like a problem to fix. Ben didn't. "You see things deeply," he said. "That is not a weakness. It is a gift." Lena felt something inside her chest shift. She had never been told she had a gift before. Ben gently pushed a small wooden tray toward her. Inside it were smooth stones, each a different shape and size. The children at the shelter used them to tell stories through patterns. They were quiet tools for quiet thinkers. Lena picked one stone, then another. She arranged them in a small circle, then placed a longer stone in the center. Ben watched with interest. "That is beautiful," he whispered. Lena didn't know why, but her eyes felt warm again, not from sadness but from relief. The older woman with the blankets walked over and handed Lena a soft woven shawl. Lena hugged it gently. It smelled like sunlight and cotton. For the first time that day, she felt the weight of everything lift a little. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring or how long she would stay here. But Ben's voice echoed in her heart. "I know you can." Those words had changed something inside her. They made her want to try. They made her want to learn. They made her feel valued, not for what she lacked, but for what she carried inside her. Ben sat beside her in quiet companionship. He didn't ask her to speak or respond. He simply let her exist in peace, the way she always wished someone would. The night passed softly, and Lena, for the first time in many days, felt safe enough to relax. The world no longer felt cold or too loud. Instead, it felt like a place where she could grow. And Ben, the gentle giant who whispered instead of shouting, had opened the door to that new world simply by seeing her clearly. Lena woke up the next morning in a small, sunny room. Soft yellow light streamed through the thin curtains, warming the blanket wrapped around her. At first, she didn't know where she was. She looked around. There were simple wooden shelves, a small table with crayons, and a woven rug shaped like a sun. It didn't feel like her old room, but it didn't feel scary either. It felt calm. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. The room was so quiet, her kind of quiet. She noticed someone had placed a small cup of water on the table for her, along with a tiny bowl of fruit. The colors were bright red, green, yellow. Someone had cared enough to make her morning gentle. As she chewed the soft fruit, she heard, or rather felt, a small vibration on the floor. Someone was walking toward the door. Ben appeared in the doorway, smiling softly. His large frame filled the space, but his energy was peaceful, like always. He lifted a hand in greeting, his fingers curling in a friendly wave. Then, he spoke slowly, so she could read his lips. "Good morning, Lena." Lena smiled faintly. She wasn't used to smiling in the mornings, but here, her heart felt a little lighter. Ben pointed toward the hallway, then made a gentle motion with his hand. "Come when you're ready." He didn't rush her. He never did. After a few minutes, she followed him into the main room. Several children were already sitting around a low wooden table, drawing pictures or building shapes with stones. They glanced at her curiously, but kindly. No one stared too long or whispered behind their hands. They simply accepted her presence, like she had always been there. Ben sat on the floor beside the children, motioning for Lena to join them. She sat cross-legged across from him, her small hands folded in her lap. He slid a smooth piece of sandstone toward her, along with a small stick. "We tell stories here," he whispered. He shaped each word deliberately so she could see it clearly. Lena looked at the stone. then at the stick. She wasn't sure what he wanted her to do. Ben picked up his own stone and drew a small spiral in the sand surface. Then, he pointed to it and shaped the word, sun. She understood. A smile tugged at her lips. Ben handed her the stick again, encouraging her. Lena hesitated, then slowly dragged the tip of the stick across her stone. She drew a small circle, then a little line, then another line, creating the shape of a tiny house. Ben nodded with warm approval. Home? He asked, moving the word gently. Lena nodded, a bit shy. He said nothing more. Instead, he drew something next to her house, a large hand reaching outward. His hand, she realized. He looked at her with a soft expression, letting her understand the meaning without explaining it. He was showing her that she wasn't alone anymore. A little girl sitting nearby leaned closer, fascinated by Lena's drawing. She pointed at the tiny house and gave Lena a bright smile. Lena smiled back, feeling her chest warm with something unfamiliar connection. Later that day, Ben walked with Lena to the outdoor circle behind the shelter. The land stretched far, open and golden, dotted with small bushes and tall grass. The sky was wide and endless. The kind of sky that made Lena feel both small and safe. Several elders sat in the circle, weaving baskets or preparing food. Their faces were kind, lined with wisdom. They greeted Lena with gentle nods. Nobody spoke loudly or moved quickly. Their peaceful movements made her feel welcome. One elder, a woman with silver hair braided neatly, invited Lena to sit beside her. She made a few hand motions, slow, graceful gestures that seemed full of meaning. Lena watched carefully. The woman smiled and repeated the gesture, pointing to herself. It meant, friend. Lena repeated it, and the woman nodded warmly. Another elder placed a basket of colorful beads in front of her. He did not speak. He simply guided her hands to feel the shapes, then motioned how to place beads on a string. The activity was quiet and soothing, something Lena could do without sound. Ben watched from a few steps away, arms crossed gently, proud of her. Every so often, he showed her new hand signals, the ones the elders used among themselves when they wanted to say something without talking. These signals were not formal sign language, but they were meaningful, expressive, almost poetic. Lena learned them quickly. She began using them to greet the elders, to express thanks, or to answer simple questions. Her hands felt alive with new purpose. As the days passed, Lena discovered she had a natural talent for understanding movement. She could sense when someone was behind her by the way the air shifted. She could tell when someone was worried by the way their shoulders moved. She could read emotions in silence better than many people could in sound. One afternoon, Ben found her watching the other children play. She wasn't playing with them. Not yet. She was observing, studying the way they communicated. Ben sat beside her. You notice everything, he said slowly. Lena watched his lips. She didn't look away. That is a gift, he continued. He picked up a stick and drew a small circle in the dirt, surrounding it with lines that reached outward. This is you, he whispered, pointing to the center. Then he drew more circles outside it, other people, other lives. You connect, he said, forming the word clearly. Quietly, gently. A soft wind brushed Lena's hair. She touched the drawing with her fingertips, tracing the lines between the circles. Later that week, the social worker visited to check on Lena. She sat with Ben and the elders in the common room. Lena watched from across the room, trying to read their lips. She caught words like progress, comfortable, communication, and calm. Ben turned slightly to her and gave her a reassuring nod. She relaxed. When the meeting ended, the social worker came to her. She knelt down and spoke gently. The words were slow enough for Lena to catch. You are doing very well, she said. I can see you are learning. You look more confident. Round. Flash. Round. 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 Lena wasn't used to being complimented. She touched the woven shawl wrapped around her shoulders and nodded shyly. The social worker left with a satisfied smile, and Lena realized something. People were beginning to see her differently. Not as someone who couldn't hear, but as someone who could understand in her own way. That evening, Ben called her over to the long table. He brought out a small wooden box and placed it in front of her. Curious, Lena opened it. Inside was a simple bracelet made of leather and small stones. Ben pointed to it. For you. She touched the stones lightly, feeling their smooth surfaces. It means, he continued slowly, you belong here. Lena's heart fluttered. Belonging was a feeling she barely recognized. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist and held it close. As the sun set, painting the sky in warm colors, Lena sat beside Ben on the steps outside. The desert glowed softly. She leaned slightly toward him, not to speak, not to ask anything, but simply to share the moment. Ben whispered, "You are strong." Lena looked up at him. "You hear with your eyes, with your heart," he continued. "That is a rare gift." She wasn't sure how to respond. So she made one of the new hand signs she had learned from the elders. It was a sign for "thank you," formed with gentle movements. Ben smiled, a smile full of quiet pride. They sat together until the stars came out, shining in the wide night sky. Lena felt something warm and bright inside her, a sense of peace she had never known. She was learning. She was growing. She was understood. For the first time in her life, the quiet world around her felt full of meaning. And slowly, gently, she began to trust that this new life could truly be hers. Weeks passed, and Lena grew more comfortable in the shelter. She learned new signals, new ways to express herself, and new ways to understand others. She felt a warmth she had never felt before. Each day brought her something new. New faces, new lessons, new moments of quiet joy. But life outside the shelter was moving too. The social worker visited often, checking on Lena and speaking with Ben and the elders. She always seemed pleased with Lena's progress. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet worry. Lena noticed it every time. One afternoon, when the sun was high and warm, the social worker arrived with a folder tucked under her arm. She wore a gentle smile, but her eyes were serious. Ben met her in the common room, and they sat together at the wooden table. Lena watched from across the room, her fingers resting nervously on her bracelet. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she watched their lips carefully. She saw the words meeting, judge, and decision. She didn't know everything those words meant, but she knew one thing: they were talking about her future. Later that evening, when the children were resting and the elders were preparing dinner, Ben sat beside Lena on the steps outside. The sky was soft with orange and pink, coloring the desert in warm shadows. Ben tapped her gently on the shoulder to get her attention. When she looked at him, he spoke slowly. "There will be a meeting soon," he shaped the words clearly. "A judge wants to understand what is best for you." Lena's heart tightened. She traced the pattern on her bracelet with trembling fingers. Ben continued, "You will come with me. I will speak for you too. Do not be afraid." He placed his large hand gently over her small one. His presence, steady and calm, helped her breathe again. For the next few days, the shelter helped her prepare. The elders taught her simple hand signals to express basic feelings: safe, calm, comfortable, understanding. Ben practiced slow, clear words with her, helping her follow conversations she could not hear. The children made drawings and little notes for her, telling her she was brave and kind. Everyone believed in her. But Lena still felt nervous. She didn't want to lose this new home. She didn't want to return to a life where she felt unseen. On the morning of the hearing, Ben came to her room early. He held out a soft blue dress for her, simple, clean, and carefully folded. For you, he whispered. Lena put it on. It fit her perfectly. When they walked outside, the air was cool and fresh. The sky was still waking up, painted with soft gold. Ben held her hand as they climbed into the car. He sat beside her the entire ride, his calm presence giving her courage. The courthouse was a large building with wide steps. People moved in and out, carrying papers and speaking quickly. Lena held tightly to Ben's hand. The noise and movement felt overwhelming, but she focused on the shape of his calm breathing. Inside the meeting room, a long wooden table stretched across the space. A judge sat at the far end, gentle-eyed and thoughtful. The social worker sat beside Ben, and a few elders from the shelter sat in quiet support. Lena sat between Ben and the social worker, her hands folded carefully. The judge greeted everyone warmly. He spoke slowly, kindly. He looked at Lena with genuine interest. The judge asked questions. Some were about her life before the shelter, but he phrased them softly, making sure she didn't feel scared. He asked about her time with the shelter, her comfort, her learning. The social worker spoke first. Her words were careful and respectful. Lena watched her lips, understanding pieces. She is adjusting well. She communicates beautifully. She is calm and open. She feels safe. Lena's heart fluttered with hope. Then the judge turned to Ben. Ben took a slow breath. He looked at the judge, then at Lena, then shaped his words with clarity so she could read them too. She is strong, he began. She understands more than many people realize. She communicates in ways that are thoughtful and deep. Lena watched closely. Her breath held lightly in her chest. She does not need loud voices or many words, Ben continued softly. She feels meaning in silence. She reads feelings in faces. She observes. She learns fast. The judge listened carefully. His expression softened. Ben continued. She is safe with us. She learns from the elders. She grows each day. She has a place here. A home. She feels understood. Lena blinked rapidly, surprised by the warmth rising behind her eyes. Hearing, or rather, seeing someone speak of her like that, made her heart swell. Then Ben said something that touched everyone in the room. She hears with the kind of ears many grown people never learn to use. There was a soft silence after that, not uncomfortable, just full of meaning. The judge leaned forward slightly. He looked at Lena and smiled kindly. Lena, he said, shaping the words clearly. Do you feel safe with them? Ben gently touched Lena's hand to guide her focus. She looked up, heart pounding softly. She nodded. Then she made the sign. The elders taught her the sign for safe. The judge watched her hands carefully, understanding the message. And do you want to stay with them? Lena nodded again, this time with more confidence. She used another sign. Trust. Then she placed a hand on her bracelet, the one Ben had given her. Ben's eyes softened with quiet pride. The judge paused for a long moment, thinking deeply. He looked at the social worker, then at the elders, then at Lena. One more time. Finally, he spoke slowly and clearly. For now, and for the future ahead, Lena will stay with the shelter under their care. It is clear she is safe, supported, and understood here. Lena felt something warm and bright burst across her chest. Her eyes filled with gentle emotion. She looked up at Ben, who nodded, his face calm, but his eyes shining with quiet joy. The social worker smiled warmly. The elders nodded with approval. The meeting continued a bit longer, but Lena barely noticed. Her heart felt light. The world felt wide and welcoming. When they walked out of the courthouse, the sunlight felt brighter, warmer. Ben knelt beside her again, making sure she could see his face clearly. You were brave, he whispered. Lena lifted her hands and made the sign for thank you. Ben smiled, the kind of smile that reached deep into his eyes. As they walked toward the car, Lena slipped her hand into his without hesitation. The simple gesture felt like the beginning of something new, something hopeful. This time, she did not feel nervous about going home, because she finally knew where home truly was. Years passed gently after the judge's decision. Lena grew in the shelter like a small tree planted in welcoming soil. Everything she learned stayed with her, every gesture, every quiet lesson, every moment of patient teaching Ben gave her. She learned slowly at first, then quickly, as if her world had finally opened wide enough for her to breathe freely. The desert became her home. The elders became her guides. The children became her friends. And Ben became the person she trusted above all others, her supporter, her teacher, and the calm voice she never needed to hear with her ears. Each year added new layers to her life. She learned to communicate with her hands with confidence. She learned to read lips better than ever. She learned to understand emotions so deeply that sometimes she noticed someone's feelings before they noticed them themselves. And every year, as she grew taller and wiser, she wore the same leather bracelet Ben had given her the very first week. She never took it off. It reminded her of belonging, of safety, of the quiet strength she found inside herself. As Lena grew older into a young woman, she discovered something else inside her. A strong desire to help others who lived in silence, like she once did. She remembered the little girl sitting on a porch long ago, misunderstood and unsure. She remembered how lonely silence could feel when no one tried to understand it. And she wanted to make sure other children never felt that way. With the support of the elders and Ben, Lena studied, practiced, and learned even more. She trained to become an interpreter for people who could not hear or speak easily. She learned how to translate emotions, hand movements, and expressions. She became skilled at helping children express what they felt, even when they didn't have words. The shelter often invited her to help new children who struggled with communication. Lena would kneel beside them, just as Ben had once knelt beside her, and speak softly so they could read her lips or feel her calm energy. She would show them the same gentle hand signals she had learned when she first arrived. And slowly, sometimes very slowly, those children would open up. Years continued to pass like well-loved pages in a long story. Lena became known in nearby towns for her kindness and patience. Schools, community centers, and families invited her to help with children who communicated differently. She traveled to meetings, guided teachers, and trained helpers. Her days grew full of meaning. One day, she returned to the very courthouse she had sat in as a child. This time, she wasn't the one being helped, she was the helper. She sat beside a young boy who struggled with both sound and speech. Lena rested her hand gently on the table, letting him know she was there. She guided him through the meeting, shaping calmness in every movement. The judge smiled at her, recognizing her from long ago. It felt like coming full circle. After the meeting, as she stepped outside the courthouse into the warm sunlight, she felt a familiar peace wash over her. She knew who she was now. She knew what her life was meant for. When she returned to the shelter that evening, she walked through the front doorway with the same ease she had as a child. The children playing inside waved at her, and she waved back with a bright smile. The elders were sitting at their usual places, weaving baskets and sharing gentle conversations. But Lena was looking for someone specific. She walked outside, toward the old wooden steps where she had sat with Ben countless times. There he was, sitting in the warm glow of the sunset. His hair had grown a little grayer, and his shoulders carried the weight of many years of helping others. But his presence was exactly the same. Steady, peaceful, grounding. When he saw her approaching, he gave her the same soft smile he always had. A smile that held pride, warmth, and quiet joy. Lena sat beside him on the step, just as she used to. She took a moment to breathe in the desert air, the scent of sand, sun, and sage. The sky was painted with long strokes of pink and orange. Everything felt calm. She turned to Ben slowly. He looked at her, waiting patiently. He had always given her time to find her words, even if those words came through hands, expressions, or silence. Lena lifted her hands. She made the sign for gratitude. Then, the sign for growth. Then the sign for heart. Ben watched, and his eyes softened. But Lena was not finished. She leaned slightly closer, wanting him to see her lips clearly. She shaped the words slowly, carefully, with deep respect, the same way he had spoken to her all those years ago. "I know you can hear," Ben blinked. In that moment, something gentle and bright lit his eyes. He understood her meaning right away. She didn't mean he could hear with ears. She meant he could hear people with kindness, with patience, with understanding. He had always listened to her in ways no one else ever had. She was giving his own words back to him, completing the circle he had begun. Ben placed a hand over his heart, then over hers, in the old, respectful gesture of the elders. It was a gesture that meant spirit to spirit, a gesture of deep connection and gratitude. "You have grown well," he whispered, shaping each word clearly for her to see. "I am proud of you." Lena felt warmth fill her chest. She looked around at the shelter, the children laughing, the elders smiling, the quiet strength of the place that had raised her. Everything she had become started here. Everything she had achieved was rooted in the gentle guidance Ben once gave her. As the sun dipped lower, painting gold across the horizon, they sat together in quiet peace. Not a silent peace, but a meaningful one. Silence, Lena had learned long ago, was not empty. It was full of understanding, full of connection, full of truths that didn't need sound to be heard. After a few minutes, Lena reached for Ben's hand and held it gently. She looked at him with a soft smile. Everything she wanted to say was inside that one look. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for hearing me without sound." Ben smiled back, and that was all the answer she needed. The night slowly approached. Stars began to shine in the wide desert sky. Lights from the shelter's windows glowed softly behind them. Lena felt complete. She had come from silence, but she had found her voice. She had come from loneliness, but she had found her place. She had come from confusion, but she had found her strength. And all because, many years ago, a gentle giant had whispered 4 simple words that changed her life. "I know you can." Now, she carried those words with her always, not just as a memory, but as a promise she offered to every quiet child she met. She whispered them in her own way, through hands, through patience, through kindness. Because she knew the truth. Some people hear with their ears, some hear with their hearts. And Lena, at last, had learned to do both.